What do you call like a huge shit? Like a turd monster?
The Luther, man.
Luther? Because he talked about the shard being a shard.
He's the shard coming out of the gaping anus.
I guess it's like trails and blazes with the metal getting lost, sticking labels on lists on. Fake ladies and males get their shit on, made up and murdered like women gliding with their wings gone.
Ho ho! Happy New Year, Merry Holidays, Christmas joy. Is Kwanzaa still a thing? Remember when Kwanzaa was a thing and people were all up in arms on the news about like Kwanzaa being a thing? I have not even heard anybody talk about Kwanzaa in the news in about 15 years.
Yeah, right. Everyone talks about how everything's getting more PC, but what happened to Kwanzaa? That's
yeah,
like
man.
The test case.
Yeah, whatever it is that you celebrate, hello and happy and merry and welcome. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I am Troy Polidori.
And this is our kind of year-end review wrap-up. We're going to talk about favorite episodes. We're going to talk about our King Shitty of the year. We're going to talk about our favorite sticky leaves from the year, etc., etc. So stick around for that. Just a reminder, we have a Patreon poll that is up and that is live where you can go ahead and recommend a topic. It'll probably be either the first or the second one that we get into in the new year. So if you are a patron, hurry up and go over there to patreon.com/owlsatdawn. Find the thread where you can recommend a topic. Then we're going to be running a poll right into the new year, first thing. And then, that'll be an episode that we tackle. We've gotten a lot of really good suggestions, Troy. Like, almost too good of suggestions.
Yeah, a lot is expected.
I know.
I feel very humbled by the suggestions.
I'm very humbled by the suggestions. It makes me feel like we should have some of you on as guests to talk about some of the things that you want to talk about. But no, they're wonderful suggestions. Thank you guys so much. And like I said, what we'll probably do is pick, 4 or 5 of them, because we obviously can't pick all of them. If we pick all of them and everybody picks one vote, then we don't really have any chance for a majority. So we'll probably pick like 4 of them, 4 or 5 of these ones, and then we'll run a poll, and then the one that gets the most votes will be the one that we tackle in that episode. If you're not a patron and you want access to that, rush over to patreon.com/owlsatdawn, and you can go ahead and get the Democracy Motherfuckers tier, or you can do the $5 tier, which gives you everything, including the newsletter and bonus episodes, as well as access to being able to participate in the patron-led episodes. Yep, that's cool.
And also, we mentioned on both of the last 2 episodes, I believe, that if you go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating and a review, and put a question in your review, then we'll address it on one of the following podcasts once we see it. We did finally figure out how to check these reviews, by the way.
Chartable.
Yeah, shout out to Chartable for listing all of the iTunes reviews from all over the world at once. Lovely.
Yeah, because before that, we figured out that you could go into iTunes, the iTunes store, and then you had to literally change the country code or change the country and then look at your podcast, and you could look at all the reviews, but you had to do it country by country, and there are a lot of countries in the world. And weirdly enough, like, as much as I am surprised to see this in our demographic breakdown, we're pretty spread out in terms of our listenership, dude.
Yeah, you think we are, or you think that a lot of people listen to us that have like VPNs because of all the porn they're watching?
I mean,
work computers and stuff.
If you are, a very clever idea of choosing Russia or
or Uganda.
Uganda was another one. Yeah, I mean, so great. Do your thing, people.
So we've got a couple of reviews here with some questions. We do want to reiterate that if you ask a question in your iTunes review, we're going to address it in 30 seconds to a minute. Maybe a little bit over if we get into something interesting, but we're not going to dedicate entire episodes or anything to these. But you will get a shout out, your name, or at least your iTunes username, and we'll read your question. So we'll do that now. First one comes from Waiting 0001 in the United States of America, and they ask, would you discuss the apparent difference between Eastern religions and Western religions, and maybe suggest a text that helps the Western mind bridge the gap to Eastern religion? So I wanted to recommend one text that I find. It's a very introductory text, but I think it's very helpful for someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with Eastern religions, is the book God Is Not One by Stephen Prothero. It's definitely not like an academic study of Eastern religions or anything, but I think it's a fairly good intro, and it's really, really practical in terms of looking at how regular people tend to think about their own religion. He takes an approach where Prothero tries to kind of situate religions in terms of problems and solutions, which I think is helpful, especially in comparison to the typical like world religions, comparative religions approach, which is more about kind of seeing religion as this monolithic entity that is universal and that everybody participates in by virtue of being human. And so all religions are basically the same form with different content. And I think that approach is extremely wrong and unhelpful. So Prothero's book is a good introduction in a very different, taking a different vantage point than that more traditional one. So I'd recommend that one to waiting.
I want to read that one now. Yeah, I mean, I would say the typical evangelical Christian answer is that every religion around the world tries to reach God through works, but Christianity is the only one that does it through faith, Troy. Did you know that?
Yeah, except for, when you read Paul and you realize that that's wrong.
And when you read James and you realize that's wrong. When you realize that's really wrong, like really, really, really wrong.
Yeah, the thing I never understood is isn't having faith a work? Isn't it an act?
I remember I was such a smug little asshole at one point. I was in my junior college class before I transferred to the university where we ended up going, and I was taking a world religions class, and it was like right after I had my come to Jesus conversion moment, and I remember I was reading a lot of apologetics at the time, and like a lot of what's his name? Greg Koukl, Stand to Reason. Was that the show?
Oh yeah, I don't remember if that was his name, but I remember that show. Yeah,
I think it was Greg Koukl. A lot of Biola guys that were philosophers of religion. And anyway, I remember like one of the big things that Koukl used to try to do was entrap people into being self-refuting. So that was his thing, because this is the heyday now of like the emerging church, and people like were really starting to popularize the idea that my truth is my truth, and that there is no absolute truth. And he would say, "Oh, is that true?" And then he'd be like, "See, haha, gotcha, you're being self-refuting," And that was like the thing. And I remember I was in this world religions class, and I had my professor talk about Buddhism and how like we were talking about like the cessation of desire. And I said, "Wait a second, so their desire is to have no desire? Isn't that like self-refuting?"
And you felt like you were such a badass.
I did. I felt like I had bested him in a battle. And I remember he was so gracious and so patient and humble with me. And I feel like I wish I met him now, because he had actually gone to the Southern Baptist Southern Baptist Seminary. And I remember we had like a lot of discussions afterwards. And at the moment, I had like a love affair with Al Mohler, who was like the new president at the time. And he did not like him because he had like come in and cleaned house and fired like all of his buddies, because he was like this old, like liberal theologian dude, like liberal pastor Christian guy. And so that was where he had gotten his master's from. And so I would love to go back and meet him now and be like, "Hey, dude, I'm sorry. I was like an arrogant prick in our class." Because I have a feeling he's probably closer to where I am now. And I could see his face. He was just so gracious with me, So, yeah, that doesn't really have too much to do with the question, but it's not that. It's not that.
We definitely appreciate all the people who suffered assholery.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have two other reviews on iTunes. One from... actually, it's the same person who did it twice. I just realized this. Ivan Ovich from the United States of America and from Uganda, apparently.
Oh, sweet.
Left two different reviews. And they both are asking what the answer is to life, the universe, and everything. Which I just explained to Austin yesterday, I believe, was a quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. How have you not read that book, dude?
Dude, I haven't read the book. I haven't seen the movie. I'm not a big like sci-fi guy.
Yeah, it's not really. I mean, I guess it's kind of sci-fi, but I don't know.
What is it, like space adventure?
Yeah, dude, it's like this Douglas Adams, who's like it's just like kind of ironic British, humor mixed in with some of that kind of fantasy and sci-fi stuff. It just, it's taking the piss. Thought you were into that.
Oh yeah, I'm into that. See, I thought it was like a kid's book.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm sure, like, if you're a preteen or an early teenager, a lot of kids at that age like the book, but I read it when I was an adult, so I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down for it, but I just haven't read it. I don't know. All right, so what's the answer to the meaning of the universe?
I mean, the answer you're supposed to say, and we'll get hate mail if we don't say it, is that it's 42. But I don't know that anybody who's read the book wants to hear that. They want something original. So what's the meaning to life, the universe, and everything, dude?
Wait, why did they say 42? Like, why is this the machine that supposedly knows all?
Yeah, dude, that's just they plugged away at the data for thousands of years, and it was 42.
Well, I do know that wasn't there that movie with Jim Carrey called The Number 23, where they actually did try to like say that the number 23 had some sort of special meaning, and there are those numerologist types that try to do that. So maybe there is something to it.
Was it Michael Jordan? Was Michael Jordan the meaning to life?
Exactly, and now it's LeBron because Alpha Boom and the dialectic. True, man. I know.
You know what I don't get, dude? This
What
question of the meaning of life. We probably shouldn't go on this too long, but when people say what's the meaning of life, what do they even mean by that?
Oh, look at that.
Because they're using meaning in like synonymous with purpose, right?
Right.
I think that's what's happening there. And
Wait,
so,
what's the meaning of life?
Or they're using it in terms of significance, because those are two different questions, right?
Right. Yeah, I was actually just doing a little reading last night about the idea of intentional logic, and we know that there is a difference between meaning and determinateness, right?
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is, if the question is what is the purpose of life, I guess that doesn't seem to me like, even if you answered that question, that doesn't mean that the purpose is good. It's like Thomas Nagel. We read the couple chapters from Mortal Questions a while ago.
Yeah.
He asked this question: what if we found out the meaning of life was actually that we were being grown by giant aliens for feeding purposes, and they just never let us know until we're about to die, and then they like capture our souls and consume them, and it's extremely like unbearable torment. Like, would that all of a sudden be illuminating?
I mean, that is sort of like double predestination Calvinist view for some people.
I guess that kind of is, yeah, and it's horrible, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
or even like the Darwinian, like reductive Darwinian idea that the purpose of life is just to like fuck and reproduce. Like,
yeah, that doesn't mean anything.
no, it doesn't mean anything. But see, that's what's interesting, right? So many people will say that like, I remember again in those old apologetic days, a lot of people would say that like people would be like, oh, I just don't think that there is any meaning to life. And then the rejoinder was, well, that seems like a very meaningful statement. Aha, gotcha again.
Well, they're equivocating there.
They are equivocating, of course. Yeah, but again, you're right. There is something different, but because the Darwinian reductive, it's just reproduction. That's not really a meaning. That's just like a sort of like biological purpose, which is different. That's a functionality, which is very different from what we understand as meaning. So, I mean, maybe the meaning of life is that we're supposed to try to find out what the fuck meaning means. You know, like identifying what meaning means is a very meaningful purpose.
So life. You basically have committed yourself to analytic philosophy at this point.
Oh no. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think it is that people are striving after when they ask that question?
I don't know. I think they're confused. I'm confused. I'm confused right now trying to think about it. So how can, yeah, because if it's just purpose, that doesn't make any sense to me, because it doesn't determine that it's good necessarily, even if there was an empirical answer to it. And if the question is what's the significance of life, it's
like, what's the
significance
value
in comparison
of life?
to what?
Yeah,
which I think is a better question. But
what's the value of life?
Yeah.
The significance of life, yeah.
Yeah, it's a better question, I think. But at that point, it's pretty hard, because usually we think of those things relative to other things, right? Like, what's the value of having a college degree? Well, in relation to what? If you were the only person in the world who existed, there wouldn't be a lot of value to a college degree. But there's a lot of value to a college degree now, because lots of other people exist and you can do stuff with it and whatever. So value,
and that's different than asking what's the purpose of a college degree.
No, not the purpose of it necessarily.
No, that's what I'm saying.
How does it produce value?
No, that's what I mean. Is those are two different questions.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
if we say what's a college degree is kind of bland and boring. Fuck. It could be a bunch of things, though. It could be the purpose is personal enrichment. It could be education, just for the sake of it, or most likely it's get a good job, make some extra money, right?
Yeah, and so all those answers have some other object, that's exterior or external to the college degree, right?
Right.
But there is nothing external to existence, if we define existence as just kind of like what everything shares. So how can it have value relative to anything else if there is nothing else relative to it?
So you think that there's almost like a sort of subtle dualism inherent in the question?
Well, I don't know that there can be, because you're kind of asking what's the purpose of everything, or what's not the purpose, but what's the significance of everything?
Yeah, and how can everything have a sort of transcendental signified by which it's measured? You get into a Russell's paradox here.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. It
almost like you kind of have to say at some point there are some primary goods that are just good in and of themselves.
Oh, shut up. Yeah, good question, though. Yeah. I mean, hey, if you guys got other questions, I love this kind of shit. I like hearing from people and having them ask questions that aren't the same thing that I would ask, or even things that are outside the box from what Troy would stimulate in my mind. So run over to iTunes, 5-star review, shoot us a question, and we'll bullshit about it for a couple minutes on the show. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. So to start off our year-end wrap-up here, now I was thinking, you said this was like the king shitty, like the shittiest thing of the year.
Well, I think you said that, and I was just repeating what you said.
Oh, did I?
In a private message that we had sent to each other. But yeah, sure. I'll take the credit.
Yeah, I think we need a better name than king shitty is what I was thinking.
King shitty. Oh.
What do you call like a huge shit? Like a turd monster?
The Luther, man.
A Luther? Because he talked about the shard being a shard?
He's the shard coming out of the gaping anus. It's the Luther, bro.
So what was your Luther of the year, Austin?
My Luther of the year. So my Luther of the year, I think if you look back at most of my shitty, I would say most of both of our shitty minutes, they pertain somehow to online behavior or online trends or some sort of online phenomenon. Would you agree?
A lot of them do, yeah.
A lot of them do. So I'm going to say that my shitty obviously has something to do with being online. It is the idea that people online love to posture as, like, tough. And I think that really fucking drives me crazy. Like, listen, I'm not a crazy tough dude, but I've been around a lot of tough dudes in my life. I've grown up in the martial arts community, and I trained in mixed martial arts for off and on for like 15 years now. And so I've been around a lot of fucking tough dudes. I was working on a documentary with a guy named Dominic Cruz, who, if people who are listening are fans of mixed martial arts, he's one of the greatest bantamweight fighters, and I think he was featherweight before as well when he was in the WEC, but of all time, former champion, and I used to hang out at the gym down there in San Diego. I trained in downtown Los Angeles, and I was a member of like 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, which is Eddie Bravo's jiu-jitsu school for people who know that shit. So I've been around a lot of tough dudes. I also grew up in a place where there were people who at least thought they were tough, or like were pseudo tough, like maybe not like proper tough, but at least like middle class yuppie fight people tough. So I've been around a lot of like dudes that like actually fight and know how to fight and shit. And so when I see online posturing, especially when it's like nerds, I'm like, guys, you're not fucking tough. And do you really want to emulate that behavior? Like, I don't know that it's the best behavior. One of the things I love so much about jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts is that the tough guy mentality really gets squeezed out of you when you really get to the upper echelon of people who are competitors. And it's because they realize that tough guy, I'm going to go into the gym and just like, fuck you up, bro. Or like, why are you looking at my girl kind of mentality is kind of based around insecurity and bullshit. And that martial arts it doesn't necessarily always, but it can lead to a sort of inner peace and like a kind of connection with yourself and recognizing your own limitations in your striving, just like any athleticism can, I guess. But in your striving for perfection or betterment, you realize your limitations. And especially in a sport where you're going to get choked out or your arm broken or your fucking, small joint manipulation to the point where you've got to tap. I mean, if you do jiu-jitsu, you will lose many, 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 many times every single training session. So I don't know, man. It's just that I don't like seeing when people, one, try to emulate tough guy shit when they're not really tough guys, and two, the thing that they're trying to emulate is like the worst of tough guy shit. It's not even like real strength. It's this bullshit insecurity that they're trying to project onto somebody because somebody called them a name or somebody criticized their journal article or something like that. And then it just erupts into this like childish back and forth that is all about posturing and trying to make yourself. It's peacocking, man. It's trying to make yourself look big so that you can get the thing that is the object of your desire. And it just, the more I'm studying psychoanalysis, the more I'm kind of engaging in online community myself, I'm starting to see this as a very strange, neurotic trend. And it's fucking, I don't know, man. It's weird. I hate it. It drives me crazy. I don't know. And you know, the other thing too is, here's the other thing. Here's the weird thing. We really think that like physical assault is like a really, 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 really bad thing, right? Like the punch a Nazi thing was like such a thing. Like if you punch a dude in the face, like that's like a thing. You punch a chick in the face. I'm not saying like a dude punch a chick in the face. As much as we are like sort of like in a post-gender world, I'm still kind of got those traditional values. I don't think that dudes should punch women in the face. But here's the thing. Sometimes a dude should punch a dude in the face. And I don't actually have a problem with that. Sometimes a person of equal stature and size and status should be able to punch another human if they get into a fight, and that should kind of be okay. Like, you kind of do it, and you get it done with. And this is going to be super controversial here, but I kind of don't think that, like, physical violence is this innate evil. And I actually think that at some point in the future, we're going to start to realize that the stress and anxiety that is induced from online fights through these kind of, like, people posturing and then being defensive and then fighting back probably causes literal physical damage, more physical deterioration and damage than just a punch in the face does. Like, if we can like measure neurologically at some point in the future, we will see how crazy this shit is and how much it actually causes more damage than just saying, dude, let's just go outside and just punch each other real quick. I imagine that causes far less damage ultimately in the long run, not just in some sort of weird like psychological, like gestalt sense, but no, I mean at the literal physical biological level. I guarantee it does, and one day we're just going to have the measuring technologies that are good enough to be able to do that measurement, and we're going to see that that's the case. So that's my King Shitty Minute for the year. Online people, stop trying to fucking emulate stupid bullshit tough guy shit, and especially if you're a nerd, man, just like don't get into that shit, because you're trying to do something that isn't even you and that's bullshit in the first place, and you shouldn't try to emulate it, and it's not tough guy shit. So it's just wrong all across the board. No, that's my shitty minute.
Yeah, dude. I liked how you kind of like crescendoed near the end there. That was good.
I know.
And you know what? You're right, dude. Nobody thinks that physical violence is inherently, intrinsically evil or bad. Because we do it all the time in like safe environments. Anyone who plays sports does it. Anybody who like runs does it to themselves, right? Anybody who plays anything that's like a physical game or involves a physical body in any way does
pain,
some
no gain.
sort of violence. Yeah. So it's all about, you know, there's other factors, external factors that dictate whether or not the violence is good or bad. It's not intrinsically good or bad.
Right. Or when you get a shot, that hurts. You go through surgery, that hurts.
Yeah, we might say those things are bad, though, but then that they're worth the bad. There could be, like when you're playing sports, the physical sort of violence could even be good in some sense. It maybe like get your juices flowing, you know?
But I mean, well, yeah, but isn't that the point? It's worth the bad?
Well, I think it's different. I think you actually kind of like the physical contact. It feels like you're actually engaging in some sort of like communal activity with another person because you're sort of bumping up against them, you know?
Well, you like the physical contact, but you don't like the pain.
No, not the pain. Where I'm talking about, I'm thinking you can equate pain and physical violence. Pain's like the result, right?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be violence if there was no pain attached to it.
Yeah, I guess being painful is part of like the definition of physical violence. I have to think about this more. But there does some occasions.
Like when you're like cuddling with somebody, or and you're like, it's the physical connection is great, but it's not pain. I mean, it can be pain inducing if you're down with the funky shit. But like if you're just like watching a movie or something like that, and you're like cuddling or something, there's no pain, but you still have the connection. So there's something about connection and pain that is different in physical violence.
Yeah, but I think even playing sports, sometimes you can experience pain and you can kind of consider it a good thing.
Yeah. So it's not pain per se that is bad, right? There are fields and webs of meaning that are attached to the pain that make it good, bad, indifferent, or elsewhere along that spectrum.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want my Luther?
Yeah. What's your Luther?
I was afraid that you were actually going to steal my Luther for a minute there before you mentioned that it was about tough guy peacocking bullshit. Because I was looking through some of my shitty minutes in the past year, and it seems like a lot of them coalesce around this idea about patience. And sort of our culture, and especially online culture, especially extremely online culture, not having any time for being patient. And this involves all sorts of areas. There's no patience in reasoning. No one wants to go through the difficult process of thinking long and hard about things, of taking your time with things, of trying to be nuanced, trying to understand the depths of things before you make a sort of declarative statement about your position on it. And that's obviously bad for all sorts of reasons, because it means that we don't actually get, we don't track the truth very well when we're not patient. But it's also in other areas too, other than purely cognitive areas. In relationships and friendships and interactions with people, we don't want to sort of go with the flow, sort of let things kind of feel things out, let them develop over time. Everything has to be immediate. I got to get what I want from this relationship right now. I got to get what I want from this interaction right now. If I don't, fuck you. And that just, it makes it so hard to actually engage with people when they automatically have their defenses up, looking for whatever it is that they think they want in the interaction. And it turns out that most of the time, they don't even want that thing. Like you were mentioning this tough guy bullshit online, right? That has all these sort of trappings of going after the object of desire. And yet, like bro culture and tough guy culture, at least you get that object of desire sometimes, right? Like you get the chick or the dude, or you get the praise of people, whatever. You never even get that shit online. It's an invisible, non-existent, empty set of an object of desire. There's nothing there to get. Nobody thinks you're badass. Nobody does when you own people online or think you've owned someone online. Nobody gives a shit. And so what are you even getting out of it? I was kind of, tripping off that for a second there. But the idea is just be patient. Take your time. Relax a little bit. Let things develop. Your brain evolved for millions of years to sort of feel things out, Sometimes you got to sleep and then pick things up in the morning and not have to resolve all your problems right away. And I think people would do a little better if they're just a little bit more patient. What do you think, Austin?
Hold on, I'm being patient in my response.
I want to know right now.
No, I love that. This has weighed on my mind and my heart heavily over the past, I'd say since I got to Australia. I think part of it has really triggered a lot of conversations that you and I, a lot of conversations that you and I have had, as well as a lot of conversations that I've had with one of the guys that I'm closest with here in Sydney, a guy named Darius, that I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, and I really want to get him on the podcast. He's a philosophy researcher, but he does work on Renaissance Italian philosophy, so very different from my background. But we just have these amazing conversations about very similar themes that you're addressing right now. And he is in love with poetry, and he's a romantic, and you have to be patient to love poetry, and you have to be patient to be a romantic, and you have to be patient to work through ancient. He's in Italy right now, digging through the vaults of these ancient fucking texts that you can't even read in proper light because they're so fragile and old and all this shit. So you have to be patient to do that kind of shit. And I've really. And I was reading this philosopher, Byung-Chul Han, for a bit, and I've been writing about him a little bit, and some of the things he talks about with regards to our burnout society, how our society it's so based on just pure positivity and pleasure seeking that there's no possibility for the dialectic, because there's no negativity that's really valorized under the conditions, let's say, of late capitalism or neoliberal capitalism. And so what that does is that induces this achievement subject, or you're an entrepreneur of the self. And so even those moments of struggle that you run into, or a limit that you run into, is viewed as some part of your growth and your process, as a learning experience. Or you can take this and you can somehow add it to your CV as some sort of, or life CV, not maybe your actual professional CV, but it's part of your life CV. And I don't know, man, it's just been really, it's just been something that I've been thinking through a lot, and trying to not find myself fall into the same patterns and pitfalls that I see the rest of the world, or the world system, or let's say the flow of history kind of imposing upon me. And I don't know, as part of a personal spiritual practice moving forward, I really want to make sure that I am more patient myself. And that includes in my research and in my relationships and in my engagement with people and with everything. And it's so fucking hard because we live in a world that I was seeing a girl for a bit that she said, we have no time for time. And I thought there was something so lovely about that. And I want to have time for time.
Yeah, I can second all that, dude. This has been probably the busiest year of my life. And it just weighs on me how little our lives allow time for time.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you feel guilty when you do it, because you need to be working on your brand or whatever it is.
Right.
And that just sucks, man.
Yeah.
It's mentally unhealthy. It's physically unhealthy. It's unhealthy in terms of our relationships. It's just not good at all.
I think this is one of the defining characteristics of neoliberal reason as well. I've been writing about this it'll be in my final chapter of my book that's coming out next year. But I think this is one of the defining characteristics of neoliberal reason. Martin Connings here in Sydney writes about the idea that what defines neoliberal reason, at least in part, is that it's a system of like risk mitigation. It's about like this feeling of uncertainty, and what neoliberalism offers are certain technologies to mitigate that risk or to mitigate that uncertainty, and that we turn into risk, and then you can quantify risk. And that's one of the tools of speculation and financial devices and derivatives and things like that, is being able to manage risk and turn it into value in the management of uncertainty as risk, right? You can quantify it when you are able to figure out how to manage it, manage variation and stuff like that. And that what that does is that it induces a sort of like he refers to it in The Emotional Logic of Capitalism, which is a book he wrote, as a sort of like abusive behavior, where you're basically promised something and then you're never actually given the reward of that something. You're only ever given the promise of the thing. And in the sort of fiduciary relationship that's inaugurated by the promise, this sort of like weird anxious anxiety emerges, but that can never actually be fulfilled. And so there's this endless receding goalpost, or this endless receding end that's actually established in the sort of like creation and articulation and inscription of the fiduciary relationship based on risk management to begin with. And I think it sort of seeps into our thought and our psyches, and it affects everything, not just from our transactional relations based in, like markets and, if you're trying to start a business or you're doing the things that we typically think of pertaining to like capital, land, and labor, right? But no, that it actually affects even the other areas of distribution. And we talked about this in the Peter Rollins podcast, which, spoiler alert, was one of my favorites, by the way, for the year. But about this idea that that there's sort of like this economic relationship based in everything, even in when we go to a coffee shop and we say thank you to somebody, and we feel like this compulsion to say, hey, I'll see you again, like in a dating relationship. I will call you soon. I will do this soon. Don't worry. I'm not going to leave you in that sea of uncertainty. I'm going to mitigate the risk by giving you a technological device that gives you that sense of peace and calm. Right? But all we're doing is creating an anxiety because we're just inducing attachment to a system and a process rather than actually creating something that's meaningful that they can attach themselves to. And so we just end up chasing our tails in this sea of like endless impatience. And I've been thinking about that a lot, man. And I don't know. I don't want that to just simply define my life and my habits. And so I don't know what it means to kind of seek something other, but I definitely want to participate in activities that do seek other and that stimulate other habits.
Yeah, man. I guess this is as good a time as any to say that I'm quitting the podcast and moving to Montana, and I'm going to live in the wilderness and grow a beard for the first time in my life.
Do you understand why I find that so alluring?
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think we have very different personalities, and that's one thing I think we both really share, that overlap. And it's also what's driven us to philosophy, I think, because you kind of have to have this patience and this ability to sort of, like get inside the tent of the thing and mingle with it, rather than just sort of extract the value and then move on.
People don't know, but Troy and I have long kind of joked, but I mean, I'm kind of serious, and I think he is too, about it, about kind of taking over the philosophy department at our old university and just kind of running it the way that we want. I think that would be so fucking awesome, right?
You want to put this out in public?
Yeah, fuck it, dude. Come on, let's start a campaign. Get the public support behind us. We can start a petition. Wouldn't that be fucking awesome, dude? We just take over that department. We can do what we want, structure it how we want. We could hire some like We could hire all of our like philosophy friends that we've made throughout the years. You know, we could have Diana come and she could run the
Because that's how
psychology
hiring
department.
works.
We'll hire Michael Burns, who can come in and he could be a part of the philosophy department. You know, other people that we'll meet throughout the years. We could have Darius come and teach Islamic theology. I mean,
I'm about it, man. If you can make it happen legally.
Gus can come and do media studies.
If you can make it happen legally, man, I'm all about it.
All right.
All right, so you want to talk a little bit about our favorite episodes of the year?
Yeah, let's do that.
So I had a hard time going through the list of all the episodes this year and trying to figure out what was my favorite one. One thing I want to say, though, I have a couple that I think are at least stick out in my mind. But one thing I've really, really enjoyed this year is all the guests we've had. And I know you share the same sentiment. It's a little confessional time here. The episodes with guests are very difficult for me because I'm just not as social as you are. And so I like I'm introverted, a little OCD, maybe a little like slightly Asperger's. So I enjoy the ritual and knowing exactly how things are structured and how they're going to go. And that's very clear when we're doing our episodes together, right? So when guests come on, things get thrown off a little bit and I'm not as comfortable. And so I think the interview episodes are much more your wheelhouse. But going back and listening to those has been extremely enjoyable for me. The Heidi Matthews episode, Amy Therese we had on. You just mentioned the Peter Rollins episode. We had Brett from Red Left Radio on. We had the Left Out guys. We had Devin Shaw a few weeks ago. The episode with Jared from Wisecrack was super fun.
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody?
I'm sure.
Probably. Those are just some that came to mind as things that I really, really enjoyed and got a lot out of. So I'm glad that you especially pushed us into that this year. It was very beneficial, I think, for the podcast and also for me. Yeah.
No, I'm glad we did that too. I mean, this year is probably because we've been around now. We've had this for a couple years now, huh?
Yeah.
And I think this year was the year that we were probably most consistent, let's say, in producing content. And we kind of got into a groove this year, and I think that's good. And moving forward, I hope it continues. And I don't like the idea of being like an interview podcast for us, anyway. Like, I love interview podcasts, but there are like a billion of them out there, and I feel like there's the same. Especially with sort of like more left-oriented types, there are like the same stable of people who are getting interviewed on every podcast, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's great, but I don't know, man. There's so many interesting people, interesting themes, and interesting ideas that we can explore that I want to continue to try to do things in a little bit of a different way, have different types of discussions. Of course, we're going to have people that get interviewed elsewhere because people want to talk about their work, and I want people to go out and give interviews because that is good for their ideas. But I hope that we can always like frame the conversations interestingly. So even like when we had someone like Amy or Heidi on, who are both very active online, or Brett on, I feel like we were trying to like let them lead the conversation, ask them kind of like was something that they're interested in, but at the same time do it in a way that was stimulating beyond just the kind of, well, let's talk about kind of popular political shit that's going on. And I hope we can continue to do that and get better at it moving into the next year. But I agree, man. I really enjoyed those episodes as well. Just from the conversations, I've probably learned so much. I can't even quantify how much I've learned from doing this podcast, not just over the past couple of years, but in particular this year. So I love it. So thank you to the guests. Thank you to Troy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry for pushing you into uncomfortable zones.
No, it's good, man. It's good. I got to get that happening. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. We've very strategically tried to make the guest episodes not be interviews and instead be more discussions because, first of all, other people do interviews better than we will because we're not trained in that. And also, it's just that niche has already been taken, by people who do it very well.
Right.
So we feel that having more philosophical, theoretical type discussions is more of our wheelhouse. So why not just stick with what we know? And I think that is a niche that we kind of have, and I'm sure other people do it too. But that's one thing that I think that we've done a good job focusing on. That is our form. And I think it's produced a lot of great content with these guests because I'm sure they enjoy that a lot more than the rote interviews that they do anytime they go on a show or have an interview for a job, or they're mostly academics.
Talking about their
a lot of
book
them,
that's
so-
coming out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of boring as shit.
Yeah, and I think that this isn't. How do I frame this? There's actually some. It's not insidious. It's not like it's manipulative or secretive behind the scenes, pulling the strings. But there's a philosophical purpose to that approach as well. That is still asking questions and that is still quite disruptive. We're still engaging in the Socratic method, right, of sort of unpacking and challenging things and trying to stimulate the minds of the youth to revolt in the sort of Socratic sense, right? I mean, that still is, because I think that's just part of our orientation to the interviews that we engage in, so, or to just our lives in general. So I think that for me, there's praxis that's involved in it as well. It's not just technical,
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what was so besides the interview or the guest episodes, what were your favorites, or what was your favorite?
So looking through the list, I think I have two sets that I've picked, and they're a little bit more recent, mostly because I think looking at the titles and the descriptions of some of the episodes from earlier this year, I just didn't remember a lot of what was discussed. I just don't remember how much I enjoyed it, or they all just kind of seemed like, I have fond memories of that episode, and they were all just kind of vague in general and equal. So I came out with one of my favorite episodes was the episode we did on McTaggart's argument for the unreality of time. Mostly because I just remember it being really fun. It was probably the least germane to anything, political or relevant to anything happening currently in the world. But for that reason, it was just kind of fun and reminded me of some of the conversations we used to have back in college where we just bullshit about things over Chinese food. Right. And that was just, I just have very fond memories of doing that episode together. Yeah,
that's a good one. And do you want to do your other one real quick?
Yeah, and the other ones, I think, this is obviously super recent, so I have some recency bias here, but the episodes we've done on G.A. Cohen's egalitarianism book, I think have been super instructive for me. I've just learned a lot reading the book and then talking with you about it and getting your perspective. The material, or at least the form that Cohen takes, being an analytic philosopher, doing analytic political philosophy, isn't like something you've worked a lot in. You've done a lot of work in a similar field, but from a different perspective. And so getting your reactions to it, I think, have been really good for me because I'm straddling both of those, right? I've had some experience in some of the continental philosophy circles, which deal a lot with political philosophy, but usually in indirect routes. And then I've done some work in analytic philosophy. And so bridging those gaps is a hugely important thing for me that I want to do in my own mind and in my work. And so having discussions on that have been extremely instructive. Again, in ways that you said earlier, I can't really quantify. I feel the difference. I know there's a qualitative difference in the way that I'm thinking now compared to before we started the book. And that's been great for me.
Dude, that's so interesting. I have been thinking about this a lot too. Again, actually, Cohen has made an appearance in the final chapter of my book here, which is undergoing a major rewrite.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so I actually engage with Cohen and then Brian Leiter's criticism of Cohen and then my criticism of Brian Leiter, but in relation to Jean-Paul Sartre, which is something that no one has, and then in the context of concerns of neoliberalism. And I kind of weave these things all together about the issue of false consciousness and the idea of whether or not the proletariat has the means at its disposal to actually achieve class consciousness, which I think is the central concern that's driving Cohen's investigation, is that he doesn't believe that dialectical reason, as articulated by the obstetric model of Marxism, is a sufficient dialectical self-awareness, or it's not let's say a sufficient orientation to achieve dialectical self-awareness. And I think that there's something really fascinating in that, and that the obstetric model thinks that it will just kind of happen at the historical moment. And Cohen thinks that, listen, even though I don't like his sort of like I don't like arguments from history because I think they can be a little bit myopic and they can almost be, yeah, they're kind of like it's like, well, just be patient, bro. Like, hold on here, you know, like we don't really know. There's a sort of like argument from nearsightedness that I think can sometimes be faulty. But I think at a theoretical level, I like what he's saying about the obstetric model being problematic because of all the things that we've actually got into. We don't need to get into it now, but it's really allowed me to think through how to frame questions a little bit differently within the work that I've already been working on for years. And so this last chapter that I'm working on has really benefited greatly from going through the book. So I agree, man. I can't quantify it, but I have been finding myself asking different questions or analyzing the same questions from a different perspective. And it's been really illuminating for me.
Oh, that's cool, man. So
Yeah.
what are your favorite episodes this year?
So I think, and again, this is going to be a definite similar sort of issue with you with like recency bias, but I think that in terms of just recording, and we even talked about it after we got done, but recording with Peter Rollins for me was really just amazing. I have no idea. I don't go back and listen to the episodes except for when I'm editing them. So I remember I went back and I listened to that one, but I'm kind of like just I'm looking for the points where we like stop and we say, hey, we're going to cut that out and start over or whatever. So I'm not really paying attention to the content per se. I mean, it seeps in there, but I don't really pay attention to it. So I don't really know like what I think about the content of the episode for listeners. All I can speak about is from my perspective as participating in it. And it was just such an easy conversation to talk with somebody who, it feels like it was really talking with somebody who has gone through a lot of similar frustrations and trials and concerns that I had. And so it was like talking with an older brother, or as we would have said back in the old evangelical days, like talking with an elder in the faith. It was like talking with a heretical elder. And so I think there was something so lovely in that conversation.
Yeah, I'll reiterate that, even though both of us, came out of the church, there was always a sense in which I felt kind of alien to people in the church, just in the sense of I think I had sort of a different sort of moral outlook on the world. And I always knew that, although I thought that it was commensurable with everybody else's that was around me. And then eventually I just decided that it wasn't. And so whenever you found somebody in the church who had a similar outlook on life, then you would just like grab that person, right? Like, like we're going to be friends now. We kind of did that to each other, right, in college. And so when I hear Peter Rollins talking about, scripture and religion and stuff like this and the life of Jesus and in a similar way that I think about it, I just automatically get all those feels. And that was what was so surprising. And not just surprising, but so just illuminating to me about doing that episode. So I'm so glad that we ended up doing that.
Yeah, ditto. So I really enjoyed that, but I would say that actually that's not my favorite episode. I think my favorite is the other book club we did, the one on Prozorov. Similar to what I just said about Cohen, but the Prozorov book really helped me think through questions that I've already been struggling through and working through, but in a way that it gave me material to work with. Like it gave me ammunition that I didn't have before. And even after spending a few weeks with him in Italy, kind of going through the book slowly and then in a dialogue with you really helped me further. And I think that it's so easy, especially as somebody who has studied a lot of like post-phenomenological continental philosophy, it's easy to get caught up in, the passive nihilism, as he refers to it in his book, the sort of competing regional narratives, genealogical critique, capital T theory, and just like raising your hands in the air and saying, well, we resign ourselves to the idea that there are just these cultural regional interpretations, and we're not as concerned with seeking the universal, whereas his project is self-avowedly concerned with the universal. And I think that as well has become something important in my own work, is not foreclosing a priori the universal, and to figure out how it is that we can actually still be sensitive to the idea that there are these competing worlds within worlds within worlds, but that at the same time that there could potentially be a grounding, a universal grounding by which we can build global communities, and by which we can build global theory, and by which we can, kind of measure our actions by, or something along those lines, and without falling into the traps of, kind of falling back into a metaphysics of presence or something like that. And so I've found it very fascinating, very important, and it's really kind of set a nice trajectory for my own work and my life moving forward.
Yeah, dude, I'll reiterate the point that you said about doing the book as the book club, or in the book club format that we did it, was so instrumental to what I got out of it. If I had just read that book as I read any other academic texts, I probably would have enjoyed it, but it wouldn't have become ingrained in my thinking. I wouldn't have sort of applied it to other things as sort of a more fundamental set of ideas. But reading it slowly and over several weeks, and then talking about it in between, so you can kind of recapitulate the ideas and make connections and do the networking stuff that usually happens unconsciously. Doing all that out in the open really, I think, made a huge difference in how much I enjoyed the text. Because honestly, like the Cohen book, I really enjoy reading it. It's just so well written, and I love Cohen's, the voice he has, and the tone of his writing. Prozorov, not so much. Not a huge fan of the writing style. It's extremely terse and dense and difficult. But when I go into it thinking about the discussions we're going to have, and with the discussion we've already had in mind, it was so much more fun to read than it would have been otherwise. So I'm really glad we did that one together, especially.
I mean, that kind of hits on your shittiest of shitty minute Luthers from earlier, is the idea of patiently reading through a text. I wonder, man, if we didn't have the academic pressures on us to publish, or you have deadlines to meet or whatever, or you didn't just feel that pressure that you have to read everything, like, what would it be like to really read 10 books in a year, and that's it?
Yeah, for sure.
Or to read one book, to read one amazing, profound book, and that's it. And that's just what you read for a year. What would it be like to take these copious, meticulous notes and to think through the ideas and to make the connections? I mean, at this point, not that we have reached the pinnacle of our education, but we have enough background and stuff that if we took a year to read one text, it would be so amazing to be able to make the connections and work through the things, because we already know some of the questions that are guiding the text and the construction of the text, and then we can bring our own questions to it. There's this intertextual resonance. How amazing would it be to do that, and to have the luxury to be able to do that? I wonder, man, sometimes I find myself craving that and saying to myself, as soon as I finish this book, my next project, I'm going to be really slow and painstaking in the process. And I know it's not going to happen, but maybe I can get better. I mean, it's not going to happen in like a perfect, like I'm just going to snap my finger and all of a sudden I'm going to be like a fucking monk. But maybe I can get better at the practice of slow reading and meditation and taking my time and really engaging at that more kind of patient level of analysis and thought. That I think that. And maybe this book club is, fuck, man, how crazy is it going to be if, like, every project that I work on throughout the year is somehow going to incorporate whatever we talk about in our book club? But it is my book. I talk about Prozorov and Cohen at different points in my book, which I would not have had we not done the book club.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. I mean, you know how people who are just kind of like casual readers, or who enjoy reading but they're not academics, will sometimes read a book and it's kind of all they talk about for like 6 months? And
my buddy did that with Infinite Jest. Yeah, he's been talking about it for 2 years.
Yeah, it gets kind of annoying, right? But actually, it shouldn't be. Like, that's exactly how you should digest someone else's painstaking masterwork that they sweat and toiled and died over. Like, you should respect it enough to give it that amount of time and let it sort of seep into your very soul in the way it does to some people. And academics, just you're not allowed to do that. You have to have a critical distance from it, which is good by itself. And you have to you have all the other things you have to ingest, right? And you have to fit the book or the article, whatever it is, into your grand scheme of thinking. So you have to like be immediately critical rather than having, the charity to engage it on its own terms. And all those things, while they're necessary for being an academic, it really kind of cuts against, I think, the natural tendency we have as human beings who care about the life of the mind to just ingest thought. And I think the book club we're doing, at the very least, tries to get both those things, which I think is pretty helpful.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. All right, so what are we going on to now? Movies, music, shows?
Let's do our sticky leaves of the year.
Okay. So
we'll start with books, yeah?
Cool.
What were some of your favorite books that you read this year?
This is hard, man, because as much as I have said that I'm going to goes to the patience thing again, I guess. As much as I can say that I'm going to try to start reading more literature, it's still really fucking difficult when I'm, got my research that I'm working on here in Sydney, and then I'm trying to finish a fucking book and then other stuff. So I just haven't dedicated as much time in my free time to reading books, Plus, I like watching movies, and I do a movie podcast. Obviously, a lot of people listening to this probably know me from the movie podcast. So, I'm watching movies. So spending time in literature has been tough. But with that said, I do have a couple of things. I read Bret Easton Ellis's Imperial Bedrooms when I was in Spain before I got to Sydney, and I think I talked about it on the podcast, and I fucking loved it.
I remember that.
Yeah. It was just such a wonderful but awful experience of having myself and my experience in Los Angeles working in the film industry and dating somebody who was very similar to one of the main characters in that book reflected back to me. And I just thought it was so interesting. And I started American Psycho, and then I don't remember what. Oh, you know what happened? The cafe where I used to go reading on Sundays got shut down. I stopped going there, and my Sunday routine got fucked up. And I started going out and exploring Sydney on Sundays. And so my day of reading like literature on Sunday turned into a day of exploring New South Wales, which is also awesome. But so I haven't been reading.
Yeah, it's the literature of the world, man.
That's right, dude. I've been reading the trees and shit. And then The Mundiad by Justin Clemens. I talked about it just a couple weeks ago. It's fucking batshit crazy. It's this weird, satirical, poetic epic. I think it's phenomenal. But mostly it's been philosophy books. And I think the ones that have had the biggest impact on me are Prozorov's Void Universalism. The one I just recently finished by James Williams called Process Philosophy of Signs. For people who don't know, James is one of the world-leading scholars on Gilles Deleuze. And he wrote this book called Process Philosophy of Signs, in which he's basically trying to think through how signs are both form and process. And any sign, whether it's like when you raise your hand, or a stop sign, or a cross around somebody's neck, or even me just looking at the exposed brick in my room right now, how those things become signs, and what is it that they become when they become signs, or what is it that a sign becomes, let's say, when a sign becomes a sign, and what are the fields of meaning, what he calls intensive variation, that are contributing, if you will, to the meaning of that sign in the gesture as it kind of is being gestured in that moment. And how then do signs change meaning? And these various different ways of understanding how signs are not just these static inert objects, but that they are processes. And it was a really fascinating book from a sort of Deleuzian and then process philosophy, like Whiteheadian perspective, that I really enjoyed. And then, because I am a Sartre scholar, a young Sartre researcher scholar, let's say, Thomas Flynn's what's called a philosophical biography. It's Sartre, a philosophical biography. Came out in 2014, but I didn't read it until just this year, and it's fucking amazing. It is probably the most comprehensive look at Sartre's philosophy that I have encountered. Well, is it the most comprehensive? It's hard because like Bernard-Henri Lévy has like this 800-page biography on Sartre, and there are various others out there. But I think this one, it basically takes Sartre's entire philosophical corpus from his earliest phenomenological works in the imagination through to his late interviews with Benny Lévy, and and everything in between, including like his last kind of major work that he didn't finish on, Gustave Flaubert. And it kind of reads it all through the lens of Sartre as an imaginative thinker. And it fits really heavily into my work. Flynn has had a great impact on my work, but also it's just really the way that Flynn is able to engage with not just Sartre, but all of the literature surrounding Sartre that has informed Sartre, from his early influence, reading Henri Bergson, to then kind of finding phenomenology, and then his sort of like criticism of Husserl's phenomenology, and then into kind of founding, if you will, his existentialist philosophy, and then kind of moving out of that into like his post-existentialist Marxian philosophy, and then culminating into this final later stage where I still think there's a through line that connects through all of this. I don't think there's a break like some scholars have suggested, which I just think isn't how the human mind functions anyway. But there is something interesting. Even if there are fissures, it doesn't mean that there is like this like 180 degree like metanoia, right? A change of direction, you know. But kind of connecting it through to his final works in this really interesting way, where he's engaging with Flaubert and doing a sort of psychoanalytic biographical reading of Flaubert, and the way that he connects all of these themes together was just a master stroke. And I think that for people that are interested, that have a grounding in philosophy, that don't know Thomas Flynn's work, or that don't really know Sartre in a complete sense, I would say this philosophical biography is a must-read.
What's the name of Flynn's book again?
It's just called Sartre, A Philosophical Biography.
Okay.
Or Sartre. 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 Yeah. As the if you're trying to be posh in the UK, you just say Sartre. And then in America,
I'm always confused about how you're supposed to say it.
You know what's funny? When I speak with French speakers, it doesn't matter how I say it in the Anglophone version of it. They're like, what? Like if I say Sartre, they're like, oh, you mean Sartre? I'm like, yeah, fuck you. And then if I say Sartre, they're like, who? I'm like, oh, Sartre. I'm like, yeah, fuck you. I don't know what to do, man. My French sucks.
Yeah, the French do that thing where they have the last consonant. They only like a third of the way say it.
Right.
Yeah, it's very annoying. It's very hard to do. You don't do that in English.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, whatever. I need help. I need French lessons.
All right, so for my list, I boiled it down to one novel, one philosophical text, and one short story. And it's kind of ended up that way. I didn't necessarily go out to make it one of each.
You don't have a poem, bro? What? You got a problem with poetry?
I don't read poetry, man. I make poetry.
Oh, I love it.
I realized going through the list of books that I read this last year, I finished Infinite Jest earlier this year, like in January or February, and it took me about a year to read, because I read fiction only at night before I go to bed. It's about 20-30 minutes, and so I just read Infinite Jest every night for almost a year. It is a behemoth of a book. I've never read a philosophical text as difficult as Infinite Jest.
Really?
Give me Hegel over Infinite
gosh.
Jest. Not in terms of like pure understanding or comprehension, but just in terms of how bewildering it is. I mean, I've talked about the book before on the podcast, so you can go back in the search in the archives if you want to hear me talking about the book. But David Foster Wallace gets a lot of shit nowadays. It's kind of like trendy now to be a hip, woke, anti-DFW person.
He's problematic, bro.
Yeah, he is problematic. And so oftentimes you hear jokes about like you find a guy who likes DFW on like a first date, like turn and run, right? Because that guy's gonna be an asshole.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, DFW is,
which is funny. Can I just say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just listed her favorite books. She listed 2 by DFW. So,
which ones?
Infinite Jest, and I don't remember what the other one was, but I guess she was in some bookstore, and they hit her up on Twitter and were like, hey, you were just in here, and we usually have luminaries, we have like sections for luminaries that we like of their book recommendations that we put forward. What are your books that you recommend? And she recommended, like one by Martin Luther King. God, I can't remember who the others were. But then at the very end, her last one that she did, she gave like 10 of them. The last one were David Foster Wallace. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, oh shit, that's going to cause a little bit of a controversy in the online left woke left community.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would just say I love the book. It's definitely complex and multifaceted, but it is absolutely like engaging in a battle with something. But I came out of it by turns changed. I enjoyed it. I hated parts of it. I struggled through a lot of it. I was enraged. I felt everything, all the different emotions, and I barely feel any emotions at all. So that should say something. I would encourage anybody out there, if you're afraid of engaging the text because of its size and because of how incomprehensible it seems, if you have the time and you have the patience and you have the wherewithal, it's absolutely worthwhile. I don't know that I'll ever have a similar experience with a piece of fiction that I had with that book.
Does part of you wish that you could like be a Brooklyn hipster a little bit and kind of engage in the culture that surrounds David Foster Wallace consumption?
No.
See, I kind of part of me, I feel like I'm missing out on something.
No. Dude,
like I want to be at a part.
I hate craft beers. No, I'm not into that stuff. I don't want to wear plaid and do like a drum circle bullshit and talk about how DFW changed my life. No, thank you.
Yeah, see, I want to be a part of that. Like, even if I'm just dipping in and out for a little bit.
That's because you like to be a part of everything, man.
Yeah, that's true.
You're polyamorous with your interests.
I in every way, my friend.
So that was my fiction of the year. I also read Dune this year.
Oh, did you?
But yeah, I decided over the summer to read Dune, and I enjoyed it. I also disliked a lot of it and was bored by a lot of it, and it's not the most well written book, and it's kind of silly, which is part of the charm. I get. Wanted to name drop that. It was fun. If you're into sci-fi stuff, Dune's a fun read. My short story of the year, I mentioned this I think in a newsletter, but I don't think I mentioned it on the podcast. Maybe I did. I don't remember. Was Dostoevsky's Dream of a Ridiculous Man. Did I mention that in the podcast? As far as
I think it was in a newsletter.
Yeah, so I wasn't even aware of this until recently. He had written a short story called Dream of a Ridiculous Man. And I read it in probably 2 nights. It's maybe 35, 40 pages. It's brilliant. I don't want to spoil anything about what happens, but it's about a man, a very ridiculous man, who has a dream that changes his life. And it's beautiful and a great allegory of sort of conversion. It's like if the Christmas Carol was good, or a Christmas Carol was good. So if anybody wants to read some Dostoevsky and doesn't want to read a 600-page tome with unpronounceable Russian names, this is much more digestible and just as lovely as his major works.
Cool.
And then finally, my philosophy book of the year. I read a lot of articles this year.
You did read a lot of articles this year.
Yeah, so I don't want to mention any of those. If you want to know about some good articles on subjects in analytic philosophy, hit me up and maybe I'll talk with you about it on Twitter or something. But I really, really enjoyed reading Thomas Nagel's Mortal Questions this year.
Yeah.
We read a couple of those for the podcast, and I read most of the rest of them during a downtime. I just wanted to read some stuff. And I don't always agree with Nagel, and I mentioned in our last newsletter that a lot of the political philosophy articles that he wrote in that book, I thought were wonderful in terms of, I don't know if I've ever had a text that I've sort of fundamentally disagreed with really get me thinking as much as some of the articles in that book. If anybody wants a sort of introduction to how you can do philosophy that's not incredibly difficult and doesn't involve sort of engaging in like a 300-page tome that is just overwhelming, that book, Mortal Questions, is a really good one to go to. And you can even just pick and choose the articles that sound interesting to you. And I think you'll get something out of it. That's one thing I like about Nagel a lot is no matter whether you agree or disagree with him, you get he stimulates thinking in a way that I really, really find helpful. Those are my books of the year.
Cool, man. Yeah, I really want to read that Dostoevsky. I mean, I want to read Infinite Jest, too. I know, Scott, you're listening to this podcast right now. I'll fucking get there one day, dude, okay? That's my homie who read it and listened to it on audiobook, like back to back. So
Can't imagine listening to that on audiobook.
So he goes for these walks. He lives in Scotland, and he goes for these walks around town. And, you know, Dundee is on the water, and it's got this beautiful waterfront view. And I know if you're in Scotland right now or in the UK right now, you're like, Dundee, beautiful? Listen, shut the fuck up, okay? I will be a Dundee defender till the day I motherfucking die. But it's beautiful, and he goes for walks along there, and he listens to different things. You know, he listens to, like, fucking books on Spinoza. I think he was listening to Spinoza's Ethics at one point for a bit, too, while he goes on these, like, ponderous walks. I love it. But he was listening to... I know, dude. But he was listening to David Foster Wallace, and he talked about it all the time in a very similar way that you talked about it, with glowing reviews, how it's a work. I mean, not that it is a work as a product, but, like, to read it is an effort. It is a labor to read it. Yeah. And I will read it one of these days. But first I've got to get through fucking Proust. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that'll be me for the next 12 years at the pace that I read literature anyway.
All right. So what do you got for your movies of the year? And try to keep this brief if you can.
Yeah, no. I'm going to keep it really brief for movies of the year because I've watched more movies, but here's the thing: is I watched a lot of older movies, like movies that are not new. I actually didn't see as many new releases this year, like films in cinema or new releases on Netflix. I saw a few that I really like. I mean, again, recency bias, but I loved Ballad of Buster Scruggs. It's the new Coen Brothers film. It's the series of vignettes online, but I really do think it's masterful. I don't love all of the vignettes. I like all of the vignettes, but I love a handful of them. I would say go check that out. I talked about Roma on the last podcast. I think Roma's the best film that I saw of the year. I think it's the best film I've seen in years. I think there's something truly transcendent about the film, especially since my work lately has been heavily focused on political economy. I just finished doing a reading group on Henri Lefebvre's The Production of Space with a group of critical geographers here at the University of Sydney, and then we actually gave a presentation on it at a conference, the Historical Materialism Sydney Conference. And so I've been thinking a lot about the idea of space, and the film Roma takes place in this background of land expropriation and this idea of displacement, because the main character is an indigenous woman of Mixteca background, or of Mixteca heritage, let's say, and she has been displaced, and she's working for this upper middle class family as a servant with another Mixteca woman. And I just thought that it kind of was the perfect storm for all of the things that I happened to be experiencing in my life at the moment, on top of the fact of just the common thread that always gets me anyway, that there's just this human emotional story on display. So it was philosophically rich, it was politically rich, politico-economically rich, let's say, but then at the same time, it was this really lovely, intimate portrayal of a person and family life and struggles and divorce and children and finding your place in the world, or maybe not ever finding your place in the world, and life trying to like grow in the midst of all of this. And I just thought it was fantastic. So Roma's probably the best film of the year that I saw. And then a couple that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed Sorry to Bother You. That was one of my sticky leaves. I think that was a really great film this year. I don't know if I talked about it, but I saw 24 Frames, which is Kiarostami's last film. And I saw it at the Sydney Film Festival here. And it's a series of 24 stills that Kiarostami digitally enhances to try to explore what were the moments like prior to that snapshot that was taken, either as a picture or a painting. And so what he does is he sort of brings to life some images on the screen and brings things off screen onto the screen, and he sort of imaginatively envisions life outside of the frame. And I think it was amazing. I saw it with a friend of mine, that guy Darius, and then afterwards we just went around and talked about things. Darius is of Iranian descent. I think he was born in Iran, actually. And then Kiarostami's Iranian as well, so we were able to talk about his filmography and other things that I just wasn't as familiar with. So it was also a very enriching film-going experience. And then my favorite horror film, I don't know if it came out last year or what, but I saw it this year, and I think it was technically a 2018 film, but A Quiet Place. Did you see A Quiet Place?
Yeah.
I fucking love that movie, man.
It was super enjoyable, yeah.
Right? It knew what it was, it wasn't trying to do anything too much. Like, I thought Hereditary, the one that everyone loved, tried to do a little too much. I think Mandy is a very interesting horror film. I really enjoyed
I love
Mandy.
Mandy, man. It's on my list.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be. Fucking metal, right? It's like the metal movie. But A Quiet Place for me was my speed. If Mandy is 100% your speed, and I loved Mandy from an aesthetic perspective, but it wasn't quite, it didn't quite do everything that I think just a cool, suspenseful film can do, right? Which is fine. That's not what Mandy is. It's a different type of vibe, which is great. It's a attitudinal, tonal film. It's a mood, right?
Yeah.
Hereditary for me, I thought tried too hard to be profound, and I thought it kind of got lost a little bit in the way. Whereas A Quiet Place for me was just perfect. It was a story about a family. It was human, and it was emotional. And if you haven't seen it, the end is one of the most gut-wrenching, suspenseful experiences I have had in my room alone in the dark watching a film on Netflix ever. You know? So
you saw it on Netflix. Yeah, I saw it in the theater, dude. It was a totally different experience.
I bet it was. Yeah, I mean, I saw it in my room, alone at night, lights out, headphones on, locked in to this tiny little screen. And usually it isn't as easy for me to get into it as I am when I'm in a theater and a big screen with a community. Because, I'm a theater guy. Like live theater guy. So I like the community aspect of whatever I'm participating in, especially if I can make the movie-going experience more like a theater experience. Even in my imagination. You don't get that on Netflix, but I had a really lovely experience watching this. So those are my films of the year.
Yeah, dude, A Quiet Place, it's not on my list, but, the fact that it's not on a lot of lists, I think is kind of, like top 10 lists, perturbs me a little bit because, it's a 2.5-minute pop song, but it's a really damn good one. It's like a Beatles song,
Yeah,
like,
yes.
Yeah, it's simple. Yeah, it's not got a lot going on there, but it's so effective at what it's trying to do.
Yeah, like it's not Britney Spears and just bubblegum kind of pop shit. It's like who do you think is like a great rock band that makes that made amazing pop hits?
Yeah, like mid-60s Beatles, man.
Yeah, mid-60s Beatles. Yeah, there you go.
It's like straight off A Hard Day's Night or something like that.
Yeah. I loved it. So those are my films of the year. What are yours, man?
So I'll just reiterate, my favorite horror film of the year was Mandy. Everything you said about it, I think, was correct. It's a mood film. It's a tone film. There's a lot of penises in it. That's not the reason that I like it, though. And it's not just Nicolas Cage going crazy. That's not the point of the film. Although that is a happy accident that happened. I just thought it was beautifully shot, and the mood of it was fantastic. And some of the scenes were beautiful and confusing and bewildering, which is kind of the point of the film.
The one where like the girl's face and then the guy's face start to like meld into one was so fucking creepy and eerie.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Especially at that point in the film. Oh, so weird,
Yeah. And I also loved Buster Scruggs. We talked about that in the previous episode, I believe. I haven't seen a lot of the films that I think would probably end up on this list because just haven't had the time yet. Like Rome, I haven't seen yet, unfortunately. I haven't seen the movie I know has been a lot of critical buzz that I think I'm going to really love is Burning. It's a Korean film, I believe. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's got a lot of critical buzz. It's supposed to have a pretty interesting take on Korean class conflict. And Steve Yoon or Won, I forget how you say his last name, the guy from like Walking Dead and stuff. He plays a horrible asshole in it, apparently. Very much against type.
Okay.
I really want to see that. Haven't seen it yet. I really came down to two other films that I thought were the best ones I've seen this year. One of them is called Leave No Trace. I mentioned this, I believe, on a newsletter, I think, previously. It's a wonderful film. It's about a military veteran who is living with his 8 or 10-year-old, 12-year-old daughter, homeless out in a national park. And they do this out of choice, not out of, abject poverty or anything. And they're not survivalists necessarily, but they kind of train like they're survivalists. He's not worried about the end of the world or anything. He just chooses to live away from people. And he's arrested and is separated from his daughter, and it kind of revolves around he and his daughter's relationship and how it evolves through the inability to live the way that they want. And her sort of coming to figure out what it is she wants rather than just what she's sort of been trained to do by her father. It's a gorgeous film. I cried like a baby during a lot of parts of it because it's so emotional. And it's not at all sentimental. That's what I think was so brilliant about it, is that it's so deeply emotional without any hint of sentimentality. I'd encourage anybody to go watch that movie if you get a chance. And then my favorite movie of the year, I mentioned it before on this podcast, I think at some point, maybe in the newsletter, was First Reformed with Ethan Hawke.
Yeah.
You saw this, right?
I saw it. Yeah, it's excellent.
I loved this film. I didn't know or have any inkling I was going to love this. When I saw it, I was invited to go see it. I was like, oh, it's Paul, what's his name? Paul Schrader?
Schrader. Yeah.
So it's one of his new film, got Ethan Hawke. Yeah, this will be good. And it just completely floored me. I don't want to talk too much about it because, you should be a patron and get our newsletter if you want to hear me talk about it. But real briefly, it's about a reformed pastor who was also a military veteran. Some common themes here between these movies. And he's dealing with his twin tragedies of losing his family and also the oncoming apocalypse coming through climate change. And an extremely interesting way that those two things can overlap. That's all I'll say about that. Mm-hmm. But Ethan Hawke is brilliant in it, and I thought it was probably the best depiction of sort of reformed Christianity in a film I've seen. I'm not really thinking of other examples, although I know that there's been a lot of bad ones. But I love the way that the Christian characters were portrayed.
Did you see that movie, The Apostle, with Robert Duvall?
I don't think I did.
Is that what it's called? I think it's called The Apostle.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
He's like this philandering, traveling Baptist kind of tent revival kind of preacher dude, I think.
Yeah, which is like not most Christians.
Right.
It's not a very good depiction of,
yeah, he's like the charismatic, tongues, Holy Ghost of fire kind of type of Christian. Whereas this is, this was excellent in its ability to not create caricatures, but at the same time to really genuinely wrestle through things that get caricatured. And that so often I think people are familiar with the themes. Like if you just say what the film is about and what he's going through, people are gonna be like, yeah, okay, cool. Christians going through shit. Yeah, we get that. But the way that it's done is so accurate, and I don't know, it's got this like very Augustinian, Kierkegaardian, I don't know, kind of post-evangelical beauty about it.
Yeah, I'll just say, there's been lots of films and stories about people undergoing crises of faith. And those are always interesting to me, as someone who's gone through those kind of things. I thought the way that this film put it together was so true to the experience, at least of my own crises of faith, in that it took these very disparate ideas, right? The emotional tragedy of losing your family with the very abstract idea of, the oncoming apocalypse, and married them together in a way that I think is so hard to do in sort of even just philosophical writing. The abstract with the concrete emotional experience that you have every day. It's really hard to put those things together. And the movie did so, I think, in a brilliant, although abstract way, because, it has to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a final gut-wrenching sequence as well.
Oh my God, yeah. The end of that movie is crazy.
Oh, shit. Ugh. I will just say this. I want to see the alternate ending. You know what I'm saying?
Like the obvious alternate ending, or was there one that was actually made?
No. The obvious alternate ending.
Oh, like, yeah, for sure.
I kind of want to. Maybe I'm a sick fuck, but I kind of want to see that go down.
I was really afraid that was gonna happen, and I was not as into it as the actual ending.
Interesting. All right. What's next?
What was your favorite TV show of the year?
Oh, here's the thing. I didn't watch a lot of like new seasons or new series, right? I actually had a really hard time trying to figure this out. The only one that really stood out to me, and I fucking loved it, so it's not like I'm just scraping from the bottom of the barrel because it's the only thing that's left, but was Legion Season 2.
Oh, yeah.
So I really like the TV show Legion. I think I have serious Marvel superhero fatigue. Obviously, because of the work that I do with Wisecrack, we talk a lot about the superhero films. And usually, anymore at least, let's say, the only time I watch a superhero film is when it's something that we're covering in that podcast. But the superhero films, that's not really my wheelhouse. You know, I'm much more interested in a film like First Reformed, in a film like Roma, in a film like 24 Frames by Kiarostami. Like, that's... If you ask me, Austin, do you want to go see Avengers 17 or do you want to go see this new French like avant-garde film, I'm going to want to see the French avant-garde film. And I don't know, Legion is able to kind of circumvent a lot of the things that cause me derision within the sort of like superhero Marvel kind of moment that we are having at the moment. And so I really enjoy it. I think it's very smart. It's interesting. And I have like a Superman crush on Dan Stevens. I think he's fucking phenomenal. I don't love everything that he's ever done, but I think the guy is fantastic as an actor. And I think his character is really interesting. So I'm really enjoying that. So, I mean, that was really the only thing I could think of. Other than that, I rewatched some shit on Netflix. But in terms of new ones that I can remember, like, it was really hard for me. Like, I don't know. And a lot of the new Netflix...
Watch Atlanta this year, dude?
Oh, I guess I did, didn't I? Yeah, fuck.
Dude,
I guess
that's my number one.
I guess I'd have to put that in there. I guess I forgot that was this year because it was a while ago. Fuck, man. I guess I did. I watched Atlanta. That's like my favorite show that's out right now. I didn't see the new season of Better Call Saul. I know I saw that in your newsletter. I loved the first two. That's the third season, right?
It's third or fourth. I don't remember.
Third or fourth. I haven't kept up with it, so I've fallen behind with that. That's the thing is I've fallen behind with a lot of the shows just because of being busy and then watching film. And so I've been watching a lot of cinema this year. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't been able to pay as much attention to TV shows. So yeah, you're right. Atlanta would definitely have to be on there just because I think it's fucking amazing. And then I watched random shit, but I didn't love anything that I saw on Netflix that I can remember. I could be forgetting. So yeah, those are the ones, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of feels like TV, other than Atlanta, it's just kind of like there's good, but there's not a whole lot of great.
Well, what's on HBO right now? Like,
yeah, it's like Succession. I didn't want to watch that bullshit about like a bunch of rich assholes. And like, what else on HBO? It's all like, the prestige dramas, which Big Little Lies and Sharp Object. Like, I'm sure those things are good, but
yeah,
nothing really seems like revolutionary and great the way Atlanta.
Did you see American Gods?
Yeah, I mean, I read the book, so I really enjoyed it. But it
same. Yeah, I read the book. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I guess like there's this shit out there, but it was just really hard for one to keep up with, but two, like nothing really grabbed me by the balls and was like, dude, you gotta fucking watch this. And then even if I did watch a couple episodes, nothing really. There weren't too many, let's say, that I was like, I have to finish the series.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the only thing for me was Atlanta. Was that for me? I mean, it's revolutionary. It's the most creative show on television. It changes the game, kind of. I mean, that phrase is overused, but it's true in this case.
Dude, that Darius episode?
Which one?
No, the one that's like his episode where he goes to see like Donald Glover in Whiteface.
Oh, the Teddy Perkins one. Yeah.
The Teddy Perkins one.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like the most insane episode of television that I've ever seen. That I even loved, and like that show can do that episode, which is basically like a horror movie, right? And then it can do the episode where Paperboy is trying to get a haircut, and then his barber keeps taking him on like side quests, which I thought was hilarious. Like nobody talked about that episode, but I thought it was hilarious, and it does both of those things better than any other show on television. It's just like it's so deft.
And then it can do the one, like, remember when he and his girl are at, like, that German festival thing?
Oh, my God, that was such a great episode.
Such a great episode. Like, just at the personal level, the clash of cultures, the identity issues going on. Oh, it was so good.
Yeah, it's a step above everything else. Really quick, two of the shows I really enjoyed this year. The Americans ended its run this year.
Yeah, you loved that.
I love that show. Not necessarily a great or all-time great show, but I really enjoyed it. And also The Good Place. I really like The Good Place. And, a lot of people think that, it's the only show on TV that has like a central place for philosophy. it's not really good at that. It's not gonna have in-depth philosophy. It's very much, kind of like YouTube level philosophy, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's more that it's actually just a well-written show. It's super funny. The characters are really interesting and fun, and there's crazy plot twists. You have no idea what's going to happen in the next couple of episodes. It's just a good show, regardless of whether there's any sort of philosophical content permeating it.
Yeah, so I watched the first season and I really dug it, especially how it kind of leaves you at the end, right? The final 2 episodes or the final episode, whatever it is, I was like, oh, fuck. I felt it, but I didn't really feel it, And then I was like, you motherfuckers. And then I started to watch season 2 because it came out on Netflix, I believe, this year, like at the very beginning of the year. Or it was at the end of last year or the very beginning of this year because I was in Spain. And I remember we tried to watch it at one point, and I watched the first couple episodes, and it's good. The thing is, it's like there's nothing bad about the show, but for some reason, it's one of those ones that just didn't grab me. And so the third season, when it came out, I was like, oh, I got to finish the second season, but then I didn't I wasn't excited to come home and watch it, or I wasn't interested in making sure that I set aside time to watch it. So I don't know why, for whatever reason.
I do wonder how much a show like that is enjoyed more with somebody. Because then you can talk about it and make references to it, and I don't know if watching that by myself would be as fun.
I think that's it. I think that's it too. That you know what? That's really interesting. Yeah, it's very different when you have like a hey babe, let's sit down and watch something tonight while we're eating dinner, and then you end up watching like a couple episodes or something like that. That's very different than when you're living by yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas I think because I've been living by myself, I think that a lot of my films have been more, or the things that I'm consuming have been much more contemplative. You know what I mean?
That's the kind of thing you can definitely just let percolate in your mind on its own. It's not a communal thing necessarily.
Interesting.
So, do you have any favorite albums this year?
Homie, I have not listened to a single motherfucking album that was new. Unless you recommended it to me. I am not kidding. I am fucking not even kidding. Unless somebody mentioned it online or you recommended it on the podcast, I have not listened to a single. Is it called? Are they called the Battle of Algiers or just Algiers? Algiers, yeah. The Battle of Algiers, the movie. Was that this year?
No, that was last year. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, well, fuck.
Last year, I think.
I've been listening to that album still. No, like, I don't know, man. I listen to a lot of older shit.
Like, what's the older shit that's been on your playlist this year?
It's usually just like I put on Apple Music, the punk playlist, and it just plays shit. So there's the modern punk playlist, which is like usually bad, like post-pop screamo shit, but every once in a while you get stuff like NoFX and Pennywise and the Pharmaceutical Bandits and the shit that I was down with when I was younger that plays. And then they have like the classic punk playlist, which is good shit too. So those are the ones that I usually play.
What's the classic punk playlist? Like Sex Pistols and Clash?
Yeah, Sex Pistols, X, Germs, Clash,
shit.
Descendants, shit like that. So, you know what I am, dude? I have become one of those like 30-year-old dudes that is like driving around in his pickup truck that has a fucking NoFX sticker on the back.
A lot of those down here in Southern California.
That's me, bro. I've become one of those dudes that I used to be like, bro, you don't even know what's the cutting edge right now, man. And they're like, listen, I like what I like. I like my 90s punk. I'm like, yeah, that's me, man.
All right, so for me, this hasn't been the greatest year for music. Maybe I haven't. There's a lot of stuff I haven't gotten to yet. But some of the really, really hyped releases this year, I thought were good in a lot of cases, but not necessarily like the greatest. Like the new Pusha T album, the whole like set of Wyoming sessions that Kanye did. One with Pusha T, one with the Kids See Ghosts album with what's his name? Forget the other rapper. But they were good. You listen to those? Listen to those at all?
Mm-mm.
I thought they were good, but not necessarily like as revolutionary as some people seem to think they were. I really loved the new Idols album. It was probably like my punk, hardcore, metal, like extreme music album of the year. Joy is an Act of Resistance.
That's great.
It's a fantastic punk record. It's old school punk. It's got a little bit of post punk in it. It's got a new school political edge to it. I think you mentioned in listening to it that it combines these elements of joy and anger in a way that is so elementary to punk, and that I think a lot of modern contemporary punk just doesn't do very well. And so, yeah, that album's fantastic. I really loved the new Mount Eerie album. It was their last album, or his last album was my album of the year a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And his new album, Now Only, is just as good, I think, as that previous one. It's actually
who's he dating, or did he get married to Michelle Williams or something?
Yeah, was it Michelle Williams or Carrie Mulligan? I think it was Michelle Williams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who was married to Heath Ledger?
Yeah, Michelle Williams.
Yeah, that's her then. Yeah, their romance is kind of beautiful, man. They've both had this extreme loss and just came together and just like immediately fell in love. Kind of amazing. But that album is breathtaking, and it's not as raw and emotional as the last album, Crow Looked at Me, was, but it's maybe even more deep and philosophical than that album was. So I really enjoyed it. The new Car Seat Headrest album, Twin Fantasy, it's not even a new album. It's actually a re-recording of an old album from like 2011. But it's fantastic.
Like a re-recording of it? Like a live recording?
Yeah, so like Car Seat Headrest's early albums were all done literally in the dude's car, like recording on like a 4-track or 8-track in his car. So they're all like purposefully really shitty, what are called bedroom recordings. And so he re-recorded it now that he signed to a major label. He signed to Matador. He re-recorded it with like full instrumentation and studio recording quality, and it's fantastic. It's really good. It's not quite as good as his last album, Teens in Denial, but because it's him, but 7 years ago, like, and he was like I think like 16 or 17 then. But it's a really good album, and just as it hits all those buttons of mine of like early 90s underground rock, with some like pop punk elements and a little bit of like teenage irony and a lot of guitar. It's all that stuff that I love. But then my album of the year is, I think I mentioned this on the podcast or maybe in a newsletter before, is Anna von Hauswolf's Dead Magic.
What? Is this a metal group?
No, Anna von Hauswolf, she's a Swedish singer-songwriter. And she does like dark, gothic, very like organ-heavy type music. It's like full of dirges. And this album, Dead Magic, is 5 songs, and they range from just organ by itself, almost like church music, to like gothic metal with her operatic voice on top of it.
Oh yeah, I know who she is.
And I just fell in love with this album. I would just go on walks at night back in my old living space where it was dark and there were no streetlights, and just listen to this album and get lost in it. And it scared me. And
that's creepy, dude.
I really, really love this album. It got a lot of critical praise, but not a lot of like people just loving it. And I think it's amazing, and I respect it and admire it, but I also just love it. I can just listen to it anytime. Not everybody can do that because it's very dark. But if you're into kind of dark ethereal music, you got to check this album out because you'll love it.
Yeah, man.
That's it. Those were my albums of the year, man.
It's always hard for me to do end of the year lists. Like, my buddy Kier that I do the I Dig This Movie podcast with, he is meticulous about keeping track of the films he watches during a year, and he actually keeps his top 10 throughout the year. Like, it's a revolving, right? Like, so by the time he's seen 20 films, he's already got like, this film will probably be in my top 10, or like, this will probably be in my top 3. And midway through the year, he's already got like a pretty defined top 10, and then, films are jumping in and out of it depending on what he's seen and whatnot, and based on further reflection throughout. And then at the end, he finally has his solidified, out of the 100 films he saw this year, these are the 10 or whatever. And he's a fucking cinephile, so he sees all the new releases because he's a fucking filmmaker professionally. So like that's his world, right? But for me, it's very difficult. And I think part of it is just dispositionally. It's very difficult for me to like really strictly maintain like a clearly delineated hierarchy of things that I have experienced in the year. My body doesn't work that way. Like, I just don't view the world in such discrete units. So it's always very difficult. So I always feel like part of me is bullshitting whenever I do any of these, like, kind of like end of the year recaps, you know?
I feel what Kier's all about, man. I want those meticulous lists. That's the way the world is. It's meticulously diced up into exactly the way that I want it to be.
It's like the matter and form distinction in Aristotle, man. You don't want the hule, you want the fucking determined. You don't want the determinate.
Yeah,
or the determinable, I mean. You want the determined. So
all order, no chaos, man. Your delusion shit, I don't want any of that.
I mean, I think I'm like straddling between the two and ever torn between them. So, well, cool, man. Well, it was a wonderful year. Thank you for doing this podcast. You have enriched my life greatly in 2018. You are my sticky leaves, Troy.
We're our sticky leaves together, man. It's been great. I really loved how we've progressed in the podcast this year. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And thank you guys so much, too, for listening.
Our real sticky leaves.
Are the
listeners, man.
It's the listeners, man. It's the listeners. Yeah, it is. Thank you guys, honestly. When Troy and I started the podcast, we thought it was just going to be the two of us kind of bullshitting and like have some grad students listen. But as I don't remember if Troy mentioned it on the podcast or if it was just with me, but it's been really lovely to hear a huge range of voices and to know that it's not just philosophy academic types that are listening, but that it's people from all walks of life. Of course, I have seen the demographic breakdown, and it's mostly people in the 23 to like 28 age range. So I'm gonna start targeting y'all motherfuckers with topics. So I'm coming for you. But no, it's been really lovely to kind of expand the audience and to see the podcast grow. So thank you guys so much. We will continue in 2019. Got some cool shit lined up, including some cool interviews and some cool topics. We're going to keep doing some book club shit. We'll finish the Cohen book club. We're going to do the patron-led episode, probably, first or second episode into the new year. Probably maybe one more Cohen, and then maybe one more, and then we'll do the listener-led one. And then, who knows, moving on, but we've got some ideas. So thank you guys. We're going to keep doing our thing.
Yeah, man, I can't wait. It's going to be a fun year.
Sweet. Well, in the meantime, all y'all listening, if you want to follow us, keep up to date on what's coming up. Twitter is usually the place where I'm most active. We do have a Facebook. Troy updates the YouTube, so you can access that way. You can email us, owlsatdawnpodcast@gmail.com. Go to, what's it called? iTunes, do the rating and review and ask us a question. Patreon if you want access to bonus episodes, newsletter, and you want to get on the Democracy Motherfuckers tier of selecting a topic. What else, Troy?
I think just one more thing, dude.
What's that, man? What is that? What do you have to say to the people to close out the year?
2018. Das Vidania, Amerikanski.